Welcome back to Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. This is our final chapter, our final time together, which means we're going to talk about what to do with all this knowledge. So we go in and study the Constitution, we talk about what the Founding Fathers intended, but then what do we do about it? What is our job as citizens, and what do we see in the Constitution as our role? You know, in our first time at Philadelphia, I talked about going through the Constitution and saying, where do we see ourselves? We always complain about the public servants, but what about we the people and doing our duty?
And there's a lot we can do. And by the way, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there. And you're going to cover some of the things we need to do. I'll just throw some other things out. If you go back to the notion of what we had at the beginning, that you're supposed to teach the rising generation, do you know, federal law stipulates that on every September the 17th, which is the day they signed the Constitution, every September the 17th, every public school in America is to set aside on that day time to study and read the Constitution, go over it. And according to the Department of Education and federal agencies, 90% of public schools do not follow that law.
Don't follow that law.
Don't follow that law. So even though that's federal law, that we're to teach the Constitution, 90% of public schools.
So what can I do about that in my community?
Here's what you do. You go say, hey, can I come in to a 5th grade class and give a 30-minute presentation on the Constitution? I've just learned 10 lessons here, and I want to go through and I want to show you what Article 1 is, Article 2 is, I want to show you the success of America compared to every other nation. I want to show you why we've been successful. I want to show you what our freedoms are. I want to show you the Declaration, the 6 principles.
Wait a minute, are you suggesting that we could actually produce ambassadors for the Constitution all over the country in the local school districts?
And you know what? I'll bet you can go to the local businesses around. Go to the auto supply shop. Go to the restaurants. Go to the folks and say, hey, will you guys contribute? We want to leave a copy of the Constitution with every 5th grader in every school around us. Because you can get those things for cheap. They're relatively cheap. And get that and go do a 30-minute presentation on how great the Constitution is.
Get some posters of the Constitution and the Declaration. Get them in your local school district.
And post that in the district. Give those to your history teacher. Say, hey, put this on. There's so many things we can do. This low-hanging fruit. But you know what? You teach the rising generation.
That's right.
And
so we don't have to have the, I mean, we want to go for some of these big wins, right? But you don't just focus on that one big Hail Mary pass. There's a bunch of this blocking and tackling, if you will, that we can go out there and do into
exactly right.
And make a big difference.
That's what the Founding Fathers believed in, incrementalism. And by the way, that's also a biblical principle that comes out of Deuteronomy 7, Exodus 23. God says, I'm going to give it to you, but only little by little. And so, as you said, any football team that goes for a Hail Mary pass every play will lose a game. You know, they'll connect about 1 out of 50. But if you go for 3 yards here and 4 yards here and I lost 2 yards here but I gained 7 on the next play, if you go for those short gains, that's where you start winning games. And that's the way we need to approach this thing with the Constitution. You know, I don't know, maybe there's only 25 kids in that 5th grade class. What's that? That's 25 kids who didn't know anything till you got there and told them.
That's right. And one of those kids may someday be the mayor of your town,
maybe the president of the United States.
Might be president of the United States.
And so there are so many things we need to think outside the box. Start saying, okay, I got to find a way to share this. And, you know, I've just gone through this great course, Constitution Alive. Who can I tell?
Great.
And you get that kind of mentality. And so, you know, in this lesson, as you go through the responsibility of citizens,
that's right.
Start thinking, how do I apply it? Where can I put this into practice? What can I do? I got to find 3 people to talk to. Whatever it is, just start setting low goals and start doing that, and it will make a difference.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, there's something everybody can do. I mean, nobody could possibly say, I have nothing I could do to make a difference on this. I love what you just said about thinking outside the box. It's almost like a free market competition thing. Get out there and find ways to make a difference in your community. We're going to go back to Philadelphia to Independence Hall one more time and talk about the duty of citizens, what we can do to save the Constitution. Welcome back to Constitution Alive, our final section on doing our duty. Because the question is, now that we've gone through the Constitution, now we have a better idea of the quick start guide of where to plug everything into. What do we do as citizens? Now how do we turn this thing on? How do we actually participate in our government in the right way? I actually want to start with what not to do before I get into what to do. Because what not to do, first of all, we don't give up. We don't check out of the process. We don't say, well, I tried representative government, I got involved and I voted and nothing changed, so I'm going home. We don't do, my own dad, he calls me a few years ago, he didn't like one of the appointees to the Supreme Court that our former Texas governor had appointed. His appointee did not make it to the Supreme Court, but when he first appointed this lady, my dad calls me and says, that's it, I'm done. I'm tired of working to get these people elected and then get stabbed in the back and they put these kind of people on the court and blah, blah, blah. And I turned around and I gave my dad some of his own medicine from all those years where he had ingrained in me a sense of duty, a sense of responsibility. You go do your duty no matter what you see. You keep doing your duty. Anyway, I gave him a good tongue lashing, and now he's chairman of a political party and involved in all kinds of stuff and very, very involved in making a difference. So he learned his lesson. But the point is, you may not see what you want to see in terms of our nation for years to come. But we don't check out, we don't give up. We don't say, well, just because we didn't win everything we wanted in one election cycle, we're going to give up. So don't ever allow that to happen to yourself. Second thing we're not going to do, obviously, use violence or intimidation. We don't need to do that. We have a wonderful, peaceable means right here in this document to be able to go out and save our country and preserve it for future generations. The last thing I want to list on what not to do is answer this question of whether to nullify. Is state nullification. Did the Founding Fathers give states the right of nullification, the constitutional power to nullify a federal law? It's a big question. A lot of people are asking. It's not quite as big of a question today as it was last year. A lot more people were asking about this. So let me give you a quick history on nullification. What a lot of people that are saying we do have the right to nullification, the reason they say that is because of these Alien and Sedition Acts. What happened was, back when Adams was president, we had the quasi-war with France, and you had what they called the XYZ affair. You might remember that from government class. And in 1798, they passed these Alien and Sedition Acts, because what happened was there were some French citizens in the U.S. that were subverting our government. You had some citizens in the U.S. that were helping the French. So the idea behind these laws was to keep that from happening, but they went too far. They actually said that even as a citizen of the United States, if you just speak out against the president and his policies, you're violating the Alien and Sedition Act, and you could be arrested for that. Every one of us in the room, we just talked about the First Amendment, the importance of our freedom of speech, to be able to say what we think, even when it's not popular at the time. We would all agree that's an unconstitutional law. Well, the law gets passed. Some people actually get arrested. 25 people arrested, 10 of them actually imprisoned just for speaking out against the president. Now, John Adams is president, Thomas Jefferson's vice president. The law didn't stop you from speaking out against the vice president. These guys are running against each other again for president. That's a pretty convenient law to pass. Hey, you can't talk bad about me, but you can talk bad about that other guy. It's a terrible law, okay? Bad idea. So a lot of people got upset. And you actually had James Madison helping to get this Virginia resolution passed. Thomas Jefferson had a friend that he was helping to do the Kentucky resolution. And so the people for nullification use this as their example, because these resolutions actually said that these bad laws were altogether void and of no force. The acts aforesaid are unconstitutional. That's strong language. But here's the distinction. These resolutions did not seek to act alone. The purpose of the resolutions were to send them to the other states and say, we want all the states to join together and let's overturn these laws. Let's reverse what's happened. The other states all rejected, and they gave some reasons for rejecting. They said, first of all, proper authority for determining the constitutionality of federal laws is at the federal level, not the state legislature. This is a federal question, not a state question. They said if you use nullification at the state level to overturn a federal law, it undermines the federal election process. You're actually saying that these duly elected representatives that we all sent to Washington from all over the country passed a law, and because I was on the losing side of that law, I want my state to overturn that law. And they're saying that undermines the whole idea of majority rules and the election process. Third, they said it's of a dangerous tendency, because it creates anarchy is why. Because now you're saying you can overturn any law, and people aren't going to know whether what the federal government passed or what the state nullification passed, what is the law, and there's going to be chaos. A lot of attempts at nullification over the years, whole list of them for you there, the Alien Sedition Acts, Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, the 1794 Pennsylvania and Virginia Whiskey Revolt, which Washington himself helped to put down, Hartford, Connecticut and Convention and Mr. Madison's War, Georgia and Indian tribes examples, South Carolina and Calhoun. Calhoun was the great evangelist for nullification, really wanted to be able to use nullification. The people that say that James Madison was for nullification, please listen to Madison in his own words. He said, there is not a more fatal inlet to anarchy that could be imagined. A fatal inlet to anarchy, that is strong language. He called nullification a deadly poison to the Constitution. John Quincy Adams said it was a monstrous and horrible object, portentous and fatal to the prospect and welfare of this Union. This is normally about a 1-hour presentation, folks. There's a lot of evidence I can give you from the Founding Fathers saying that nullification is a bad idea. The Founding Fathers definitely did not give states the power to nullify a federal law. Nullification, think about it, would place minority power over majority power. Just think about the logical outcomes. Any law, if you can nullify one federal law, you can nullify any federal law. So any law the feds passed is open for nullification. So if you pass a strong immigration law at the federal level, then you're going to have California nullifying. If you pass a gun control law at the federal level, you're going to have Texas nullifying. Marriage, abortion, there's always going to be a losing side. I wish there was a silver bullet when there was a bad law passed in Washington that I don't like. But friends, representative government can be difficult. It takes work to be successful in a representative government. And so we have to recognize that if we're on the losing side, then we obey the law and work hard to change it if we want to. In fact, that's the way Sam Adams put it. He said, as it becomes a citizen, I will acquiesce in the choice of the majority of the people. So think about that. That's saying that doesn't mean I'm rolling over and I'm saying I'm done, I'm not going to fight anymore. It means I'm going to obey the law while that's the law, and then I'm going to work hard to change it. You don't fix the Constitution by breaking the Constitution. So when you have a bad law come out of Washington, D.C., you've got two options. Number one, you do exactly what happened to the Alien and Sedition Acts. You convince the majority of the nation to reverse course. In the 1800 election, now think about it, you got the Federalist Party is the one that did the Alien and Sedition Acts, that's Adams. You got the Anti-Federalist Party, Thomas Jefferson, speaking out against it, talking about how bad it is. The Anti-Federalists mopped the floor with the Federalists in that election. Jefferson beats Adams for the presidency. Anti-Federalists take over Congress, absolutely wiped them out. And they reversed some of those laws. Jefferson actually pardoned the guys that were in prison. So they convinced the nation to reverse course because it was such a bad act and so unpopular. That can happen again if you have a bad law. In my opinion, the health care law is a bad law. I think you already see the people saying we're going to reverse course. And I think you'll see that over time, those things will take care of themselves if the people let their voice be heard. Now, there is a second option, and that is the courts rule the law unconstitutional. That's an appropriate function of the courts if it's obviously on its face an unconstitutional law. We talked about earlier, okay, what if the courts overrule? Take health care, okay? Health care is passed. If the courts had ruled that it was unconstitutional instead of saying that it was constitutional, I said earlier how the Congress could then repass the law. Well, that would not happen because you already have a House of Representatives that has voted to repeal the law. So the people have let their voice heard. So that system has a way of working itself out, but it takes work. There's no silver bullet. You don't get to just say, well, since the other side won in Washington, D.C., I'm taking my ball and going home. We're just not going to participate in Texas. I mean, you just can't do that. You have to obey the law while it's the law and then work hard to change. Best quote on this is George Washington. He reminded Americans that changes must be made only by using the way which the Constitution designates, but let there be no change by usurpation, for though this in one instance may be the instrument of good, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. It's what we talked about earlier. The end does not justify the means. Okay, you can't cheat the system or work around the process because you don't like the results that we've gotten. I could tell you stories that horrified you where you have people that ignore the process, where a chairman of a committee, a bill gets passed out of that committee with amendments on the bill, and because the amendments came from the other party, the chairman instructs his clerk to not put the amendments on the bill when it goes to the floor, completely ignoring the process. That's the concept of end justify the means. I'm going to get my way regardless, ignoring what these guys respected. They respected the idea of the rule of law. And so we have to do the same thing and work that process however long it takes. So those are the things not to do. What do we do? Well, right off the bat, we talked about in the Constitution, we're looking for the things we're supposed to do. Let's flip back real quick to the very first part, Article 1, Section 1. Actually, the first place that we see a responsibility for we the people is Section 2. So the very first word, what's the first word in the Constitution, not including the preamble, we're into the part that has the force of law, the first word in the Constitution where we the people have a responsibility.
Chosen by the...
Chosen, who said that? You go, girl, that's it. Chosen, that is the word. So the House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year by the people. So that's the first place we see our job. So even in Article 1, Section 2, right there, voting, that's our job. That's the first place we have a responsibility. Now, I know some people say, my vote doesn't count, it's not going to make any difference. Look, if you think your vote doesn't count, living proof is standing before you right now. When I ran for the legislature in 1998 back in Texas, 30,000 people voted in my race. 30,000. I lost by 20 votes. 20 votes. Now, I don't know about in your states. Where I live, 20 votes, man, that's an average-sized homeschool family right there. Okay? That's just one average homeschool family, 20 votes. In fact, you probably heard of 19 kids and counting, you know, the Duggars. I called Jim Bob that night. I said, man, if you just lived in my district, I'd have won. I mean, one family could have taken care of it, right? Look, everybody can make a difference. In fact, the guy standing next to me, when they told me I lost by 20 votes, he said, 20 votes? He said, Rick, I could have got you 20 more votes. To which I wanted to lay hands on him without prayer. You know, that was not a good time to tell me 20 votes. Anyway, we had a recount in my particular election, and I ended up winning by 36 votes. So I lost by 20. We recount, the vote switches, and I win by 36. We found some hanging chads. And so I ended up winning by 36. And then, now this was 1998, all right? And 2000 hadn't happened. Remember the Florida election and all the chaos and all? So that had, 1998, I went on a recount. Nobody knows what a recount is or a hanging chad. I mean, it was news. I get this call the day after the election. Now, who is governor of Texas in 1998? George Bush. I get this phone. They said, Representative-elect Green, we have Governor Bush on the phone. Can you take the call? What would you say? Take that call, man, all right? He gets on the phone. He said, Rick, he said, boy, that was close. He said, I'm officially dubbing you Landslide Green. He laughed, man. He thought that was funny in 1998. Wasn't so funny in 2000, was it? Kind of had his own little recount to deal with, you know what I mean? So he has a recount too. Now think about it. Presidential election, 1998, in 2000, President of the United States by 537 votes. 537 votes determined President of the United States. Don't ever tell me your vote doesn't count. Every chance you get, let your voice be heard and your values counted. Every vote counts, no question about it. And here we have, in Article 1, our choice. That's what's going to determine what our Congress looks like. How many quotes did we already talk about last night? James Garfield talking about it's up to us, it's up to the people. John Francis Mercer from the Constitutional Convention saying it's not the document that's going to govern us, it's the men we put into the government that will govern us. So it's our choice. We got to choose wisely. It's not just showing up and whatever name sounds good, or are they in the right party, and all those things that sometimes influence us too much. We got to know who the person is, what they stand for, what their voting record is, what they're going to do. So here's some advice for you. This comes from Noah Webster, one of our founding fathers, a great guy, great educator as well. He said, when you become entitled to exercise the right of voting for public officers, let it be impressed on your mind that God commands for you to choose for your rulers just men who will rule in the fear of God. The preservation of our government depends on the faithful discharge of this duty. If the citizens neglect their duty and place unprincipled men in office, now listen to this, it's like a prophecy of where we are today. He said if we neglect our duty, what we're supposed to do under Article 1, he said, then, and we place unprincipled men in office, the government will soon be corrupted. Laws will be made not for the public good so much as for selfish or local purposes. Anybody say bridge to nowhere? Corrupt or incompetent men will be appointed to execute the laws, and the public revenues will be squandered on unworthy men. And the right of the citizens will be violated or disregarded. If our government fails to secure public prosperity and happiness, it must be because the citizens neglect the divine commands and elect bad men to make and administer the laws. What's he saying? It's up to us. Article 1 right there says it's our job to choose those leaders. The good book says, when the righteous rule, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. In our nation, we get to choose. That is a right that most people who ever lived on the planet did not have. We get to choose our leaders. We forget how special this system is. Most people that ever lived on the planet, they only knew tyranny and oppression. We get to choose our leaders, folks. Let's make sure we're choosing wisely. You know, what happens is if we're not involved, we see these bad results in our economy or in our nation or in our culture. Those bad results didn't just happen. Those bad results were the result of bad policy. That bad policy comes from a certain group of people. I used to call them foolish politicians. My wife said that wasn't nice. So now I say ill-advised officials. Does that sound nice? Does that sound a little... Okay, so I'm being touchy-feely, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, these ill-advised officials, where do we get them? From us, right? Choice of the people. So here's what I want to challenge you to do. Instead of just showing up in November and complaining about the options, how often do we do that, right? I mean, it's easy to show up at the party and look at all the desserts out there on the table and say, well, I don't like any of those. Where's my gooey, chewy chocolate chip or whatever? You know, we complain about what's there. Takes a little work to show up a little early and get in the kitchen, right? We need to show up early, get in the kitchen, and be part of mixing up the ingredients that will provide for the options when everybody else shows up. So that's what I'm asking you to do. Get inside the mixing bowl of our process that these guys created. Don't just show up in November, get involved long before that. Here's the 3 ingredients in our mixing bowl that you and I can impact as citizens. Number 1 is the knowledge of the people. We got to start there. We got to start with the education of the people so that we know what the principles are, what these guys put in place, and then we can take those principles and we can measure the candidates by the principles. But if we don't know the plumb line, we don't know what to look for. If we get educated about the principles, then we can go to the next step, and that's the pool of candidates. So we get the knowledge of the people. That's what we're doing with our class. That's what we do back home. That's why I want you to take this class and open up your home and have people come over and watch the DVDs, doing your Sunday school classes in your schools, wherever you want to do it. Educate the people about what happened here in this room with the Founding Fathers. And then influence the pool of candidates. Maybe you in this room running. Maybe asking some people that you know that have been good leaders in business or education or in church or whatever it might be. If they've shown leadership skills, ask them to run for school board or the legislature or Congress or whatever it might be. So we improve the pool of candidates and then the actions of the citizens. That means us impacting the political process. Well, knocking on the doors, making the phone calls, contributing to candidates, giving of our time. If we'll do those 3 things, knowledge of the people, pool of the candidates, and actions of the citizens, you get in that mixing bowl, that will create a better choice for the people. So now the options when you show up are going to be better if we're involved back in the primaries. We're involved in helping to recruit people to run, educate people about that, not just voting in November, but voting in the primary. Your influence in your primary back home in your state, it's going to be about 10 times your influence in the general. Because so few people show up in the primary, you're going to have much greater influence, your one vote or your efforts in influencing that vote out there. You do that, we'll get a better choice in November. Then you'll have statesmen and patriots at all levels of government instead of politicians. You know the difference between a patriot and a politician, right? A politician is only thinking about the next election. A patriot, like these guys, is thinking about the next generation. These guys thought generationally. They didn't do things for themselves. They made their decisions thinking, okay, I need to be thinking 30 years down the road, 100 years down the road. What did Ben Franklin tell us? He said he gave us a republic if we could keep it. So we've got a great system, but it's our job to keep it. We get those statesmen and patriots, we'll get good policy. That will give us the good results. It's easy to decide, agree on what the good policy is. The hard part is getting into the system and working the system. So there's your 3 ingredients. You know what I'm really asking you to do? I'm asking you to give of your lives, your fortunes, and your sacred honor, just like these guys did. When they came forward and signed beneath that amazing final sentence and they pledged their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor, they gave it. I'm asking you to give of your life, your time. Your life is your time. I'm asking you to give a few hours a week to help work the system, because the system will work. What they created will work if we'll work it. Your fortunes, giving of your money to good causes out there, good candidates out there that will be good government. And sacred honor, that's the willingness for all of us to stand up and speak the truth. Don't be afraid of, let the chips fall where they may. People are going to call me. They do call me all kinds of names. You know what? They're not shooting at me. I mean, these guys that served and were willing to give their lives and have bullets whiz past their heads, that's sacrifice, man. It's easy for me to stand up, speak the truth, and let people call me whatever I want. That's sacred honor. Lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. Give of it. Invest in those 3 areas. So you do it for Congress. You do it for the president. So in Article 2, what is our job? It's voting. It's being involved in choosing a good president. You say, Article 3, Rick, what could I possibly do there? Those judges are appointed by the president. I can't influence that. Well, you influence who the U.S. senators are that are going to approve those judges. And you get involved at the local level back home in your state. About half the states elect their state judges. That's the farm team. So you can influence who the farm team is that will later be the federal judges. And then you can support some of these great organizations out there, Alliance Defense Fund and ACLJ and Pacific Justice Institute and Liberty Council, and just great legal organizations that are arguing before the Supreme Court and helping to raise up good attorneys and good judges. Article 4, I mentioned earlier, we're a republic, not a democracy. Educate people on that. It's right there in Article 4. Get plugged in. Listen to our radio program daily. We're going to encourage you. We're not a doomsday organization. A lot of people, they run around the country saying, it's all over. America's done for. Grab your guns and canned food. Go hide out at the ranch. I can't stand people like that, man. They're depressing. They could light up this room. By leaving. You know? My friend Dr. Jarvis, he says they got mental BO. It's like they've been weaned on a pickle or something. Drink milk out of a churn. I mean, they're just depressing all the time. This black cloud follows them around. We don't have to be like that. You know, that reminds me of those 10 spies that came back from the promised land and said, oh, it's too hard. The giants are too big. There's no way we can fly. They depressed the people. The Bible says that an entire generation had to die in the wilderness because of the bad report from those 10. Let's be like the other 2 spies. Remember who the other 2 were? Joshua and Caleb. Joshua and Caleb saw the same challenges, the same giants, all the same stuff. They came back and they said, yep, it's going to be hard. Yeah, oh yeah, giants, huge giants. It's going to be tough. We're going to have to take the land a little bit at a time. But they said, God's given us the land. Let's go take it. These guys gave us a great system of freedom, a system that works. Let's go out there and work the system. Let's be optimistic. Let's be joyful in what we do. We don't have to be angry. We can be excited about having freedom and just get out there and participate in it. Also, the amendments, you can help, find one of those amendments, make it your pet peeve project and help to make it happen. Watch out for those treaties. We talked about the danger of the treaties. Make sure you're on them, burning up the phones, calling the senators if it's a bad one, and then live the Bill of Rights. You go live out these freedoms. What good are they just words on paper? You got to live them. So when it comes to that freedom of religion, get out there and live out your faith. When it comes to that freedom of speech, speak the truth with boldness. Don't be afraid to speak out. You want that freedom of the press, man, you be the press. You can start your own blog, your own newspaper, all those things. You can do that. And people, Facebook, all those things, we have tools that just, boggle the mind. You can reach more people in an instant than the Founding Fathers could do in weeks. Think about their committees of correspondence. How long you got to wait for the Sons of Liberty to send one letter from Boston, let's say, down to somewhere in Virginia, and now the letter's going to get back. And we can send a tweet, and thousands of people get that committee of correspondence. We need to be the new committees of correspondence. We need to get out there and be active that way. Assemble every chance you get, just like we did here, just like you can do back home in your community, and petition so that your voice is heard. I'm sure some of you in here, and I know some that are watching tonight or are going to watch the DVDs, this might be new for you. Maybe you hadn't been involved in politics before. I've been kind of taking my own informal poll, asking people, why are you involved now? Why weren't you involved 2 years ago or 10 years? What changed for you? Why are you involved in your government today? And you wouldn't believe, it's not like the most answered question just by a few percentage. About 80% of the time, the answer I get is my grandkids. People are literally saying, I'm thinking about my grandkids not getting to enjoy the same freedom that I enjoyed. And I want to make sure that I pass the torch of freedom intact to them. Reverend Matthias Burnett put it this way. He said, to God and posterity, this is in 1801, to God and posterity, you are accountable for your rights and your rulers. Let not your children have reason to curse you for giving up those rights and prostrating those institutions which your fathers delivered to you. I don't want my children cursing me because they don't have the same freedom that I enjoyed. Let's do our part in preserving it. And don't take a short-term view. Take a long-term, generational view. Realize that you may not get to see the fruit of your labor. That's hard for me to accept sometimes. But I have tried to adopt the philosophy of the son of one of the men that gave us our Declaration of Independence. John Adams was, of course, our second president. His son, John Quincy Adams, was our sixth president. And John Quincy Adams did something that I just can't even get my head wrapped around. He went from being president of the United States to running for Congress. Went from being the man on one end of Pennsylvania Avenue to going to be today it would be one of 535 in the House and the Senate both. And he did it for one reason. He wanted to end slavery. He wanted to get rid of slavery. He wanted to make sure that what they did in this room, what his father was part of, would finally apply to all Americans. So he goes home and he runs for Congress. And he gets elected and he gets in Congress and he's like a man against the world, man. He's trying to end slavery and it's a pro-slavery Congress and he's not getting anywhere. He's literally beating his head against the wall. He's coming in week after week, month after month, year after year with no results. Now look, I'm a type A person. I want results. My wife says I'm type AAA. I go 100 miles an hour and I want, when I got in the legislature, it drove me nuts that I couldn't change the world overnight. I wanted it all done in one legislative session. It took a while for me to figure out. It takes years sometimes to get big things done. John Quincy Adams understood this. And so when he kept hitting the wall and not getting anywhere, he didn't get frustrated. He just kept coming back. You know that pro-slavery Congress got so frustrated with John Quincy Adams, they passed the John Quincy Adams gag order. They said, Adams, you can talk about anything you want, but we are sick of hearing you talk about getting rid of slavery. You can't even do it anymore. He just keeps coming back week after week, month after month, year after year. 13 years with zero results. Now, can you imagine that? You look at what we're trying to do in our country right now. Can you imagine fighting for more than a decade with no results and still being able to come back and fight more? I don't know how he did. 13 years, no results. A reporter comes to him and says, what is your problem? Why are you doing this? You're not getting anywhere. You're wasting your time. You're wasting my time. You're wasting the Congress's time. You're a waste of time. Why are you doing this? And John Quincy Adams said something I hope you'll adopt as your philosophy as you try to save our country and save freedom for future generations. He said, duty is ours. Results are God's. Duty is ours. Results are God's. He said, I'm just doing my duty. I'm going to leave the results up to God. These guys understood duty. Remember me saying last night, quote after quote after quote, these guys would use that word duty. Duty of nations, duty of individuals, duty, all the time, duty, because they understood it's hard work, but I'm willing to do it because freedom is worth it. John Quincy Adams understood duty is ours, results are God's. Did he get to see an end to slavery in his lifetime? No. 4 years later, after he had that interview, he dies on the floor of Congress, literally in Congress. Actually, he had the stroke on the floor of Congress. They moved him into the Speaker's office, and he died in the Speaker's office. But he dies there in the Capitol, there in Congress. 17 years of fighting, no results. But for 1 2-year term, he served with a kid that he became a mentor to. And he kind of did a brain dump into that kid, taught that kid what he knew. They became very good friends. This freshman member of Congress became very good friends with the president, good enough friends that that freshman member of Congress was a pallbearer at John Quincy Adams' funeral. That kid goes home, doesn't get reelected. Runs for another office, loses, another office, loses, another office, loses. Just keep losing. Finally wins another election. It's almost 15 years later, and Abraham Lincoln becomes President of the United States and implements the same 3-step plan that John Quincy Adams had tried for 17 years to accomplish. Duty is ours, results are God's. We have no idea who we might be planting the seeds for that's going to come along and water. We have no idea what this generation that is being raised up right now. Remember what John Jay said? Teach the rising generation to be free. If we'll teach them to be free, we have no idea what they may accomplish in bringing America back to those freedoms and preserving them for future generations. Friends, I cannot thank you enough for being willing to dive into the Founding Fathers and the founding documents. You are patriots. You're patriots like these guys were patriots. And you are literally, we together are once again standing on that Lexington Green. This is just like April 19th, 1775. It's the morning after Paul Revere's ride. It's more than a year before these men would gather and sign the Declaration of Independence. It's the day that that ragtag bunch of 77 lined up on the Lexington Green in defense of freedom. And Pitcairn, he rides up, Major Pitcairn, he's got 6 companies of British infantry. That's 800. 800 of the King's finest fall into position. They're only about 150 feet from that little group of 77. And Pitcairn hollers out, he says this. He says, "Disperse ye rebels, disperse ye villains, lay down your arms." Well, our Captain Parker, he walks up and down that little line of 77, and he said this. He said, "Don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have war, let it begin here." And then that shot heard around the world was fired. That's where your freedom and my freedom began. I'm here to tell you, if that freedom is going to survive another generation, it begins right here in your hearts and mine. Sorry, I just can't believe I'm in here. If we are if the next generation is going to enjoy what we've enjoyed, if my 4 kids you got to see, Trey and Reagan, Cameron and Rhett, if your kids and your grandkids are going to enjoy freedom, it's up to us. Let's go out there and save our country. Let's keep alive what these men did. Thank you, and God bless you for being a part of this class. Appreciate you. All right. Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you all for the late nights and for being a part of this. Appreciate you very, very much.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union,
union,
and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity.
these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states.
In order to make our union stronger.
That they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Wow, David, first of all, thank you. I would not have had the opportunity to do that and teach in Independence Hall. First of all, if I hadn't learned all of this from you and from our founding fathers through your library, but also for just suggesting that we go to Philadelphia. What a great experience.
Well, you know, and I appreciate the compliment, but this is our history. I mean, people say, oh, I quoted from, no, you didn't. You quoted from the founding fathers. We just happen to be people who put it out, but everybody can do that. And
That's right.
as I mentioned, I'm a cowboy. I shouldn't be doing this kind of stuff, you know, but everybody can do something.
Yeah.
And once you do, it starts growing and it starts making a difference because it does ripple outward. I mean, the founding fathers didn't have internet, which look what they did with that internet.
That's
look
right.
at the technology. They did it one person at a time, reaching out the Sons of Liberty to communicate. The committees of correspondence sent out these notifications, which is an email blast. I mean, all this stuff, they used everything they could, and everybody did something. And I love the example in Nehemiah. Our organization we call Wall Builders because it's out of the book of Nehemiah in the Bible, which is the largest grassroots effort. And in their case, as they went back to rebuild what had been torn down in their nation, they literally, and this was really kind of the dregs of society because they kept the really good guys over in Babylon, Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they sent back, we don't need you guys. You guys go back to Jerusalem. And so they got back. It's in rough shape. And Nehemiah...
That had to be a little daunting, right? I mean, when we think about our challenges today, if we were to show up and everything's rubble,
that's
the
a challenge because that rubble is stones that weigh from 70 to 100 tons.
Wow.
And I'm supposed to lift that back 100 foot in the air to rebuild the wall? You got to be kidding me. And that's what these guys thought. And so as they got there and looked at it, they got all discouraged and said, we can't do this. And Nehemiah got them together and said, you know, we will get this done. And here's the deal. If everybody will do their part, it'll all go. And they said, it can't be done. Well, when everybody decided just to do their part, 52 days later, the entire thing's done. And you find that there were some guys who really motivated, like the men of Tekoa rebuilt 1,500 feet on the wall. The priests only rebuilt their own home. But you know what? That was one home. And if everybody rebuilds their own home, then the whole wall gets, because the homes were on the wall. And so 52 days later, they're going, my gosh, we did this. And if you look at who did it, it wasn't people who were qualified to do it, because it should have been stonemasons doing this.
Yeah.
You got a perfume maker who's doing this. You got a soldier. You got a man and his daughters out there doing it. You got priests doing it. You look at all the people involved in rebuilding, and that's the way we are in America. If everybody will pick up and do their part by throwing it all together, man, that is massive, massive stuff.
And not be discouraged when you look at the big
That's
picture and
right.
you think, I can't change the whole thing. Just like with Nehemiah and those guys, I mean, they said, okay, I'm going to focus on what I can do in
I don't
my
have to
community.
rebuild all the walls. I've just got to rebuild
That's
this
right.
part right here.
There you go.
And if I do this part right here, and if we'll focus on what we can rebuild and not worry about what everybody else is supposed to do, duty is ours, you know, that whole duty concept, if we'll just do that, it will make a difference. Now, the guideline that we started with and the guideline that's really good to close with is let's go back to the 6 things that John Jay told us.
Yeah.
And John Jay gave us these 6 marching instructions, if you will, and we need to think this way. And so go back to these 6. He said, every member of the state ought diligently to read and to study the Constitution of his country and teach the rising generation to be free. By knowing their rights, they'll sooner perceive when they're violated and be the better prepared to defend and assert them. And again, the verbs, every member of the state ought diligently to read and to study the Constitution of his country and to teach the rising generation and those around us to be free.
Now, in the class, we've done number 1 and number 2 there. We've
That's right.
read and we've studied. Okay, so now, and we've done some teaching, but now we're asking everybody else to do this part now.
We're asking everybody else to become the
Right.
teachers. And I'm not qualified to be a teacher. Look, if you got a mouth, you're qualified to be a teacher because
Yeah.
you can teach somebody. You can teach somebody that works with you or around
And
you.
even if you don't have a mouth, if you have your computer and your own
You know, that's
whatever
exactly
it is,
right.
you can
You're
do it,
right.
yeah.
You don't even have to have a mouth
That's
because now with social media, you can teach a lot of people. And so you teach the rising generation to be free. by knowing their rights. Once you know what they are, you'll sooner perceive when they're violated.
And now we're there, right? We've
now
learned
know,
what those rights are. So
which means we can recognize violations
Yeah.
much quicker. And once you recognize a violation, you don't just sit by and say, gosh, I wish that hadn't happened. No, you get up and you defend and you assert those constitutional rights.
even if it's not you, right?
Even
I mean,
if
if
it's
you
not
read
you.
about something happening in your town or even somewhere else in the country that you know is against those rights, then let your voice be heard.
That's right. If it violates any constitutional right, you pop up and defend the whole thing.
Yeah.
And you know, that's one of the things that we learned from Pastor Martin Niemöller, who had been a hero in World War I, but he's in World War II. And he's the guy who coined that thing, and he said it different ways, different times. But he said, you know, when they came for the socialists, I didn't stand up because I wasn't a socialist. And when they came for the union workers, I didn't stand up for them because I wasn't a union worker. And when they came for the Jews, I didn't stand up because I wasn't a Jew. And then when they came for me, there's nobody left to stand up for me. And that's the thing you've got to get, is we got to have each other's back. And, you know, I may not be a big Fifth Amendment guy. Maybe I'm a Second Amendment guy. Well, I'm going to stand with the Fifth Amendment guys. You know, maybe I'm a big First Amendment guy, but I'm not very much of an Eighth Amendment guy. Well, I'm going to go stand with the Eighth Amendment guys. And so it is defending and asserting. And it's not just asserting what we're interested in, it's asserting what the Constitution says, because that is the framework for liberty. And that liberty gives us success and prosperity and stability, and all the things we enjoy come from that framework. So again, the 6 verbs on this, real simple. Read the Constitution. And by the way, let me talk about read for just a minute. You know, we talked before this lesson about how that by federal law, everybody's supposed to study that in public schools.
Right.
And it doesn't happen. Well, one of our friends in Congress, who is a really good Constitution guy, always carries the Constitution with him, he thought, you know what, it'd be a really cool thing to even have that in Congress. So he went and introduced a resolution, which is non-binding, a resolution that on Constitution Day, it would be good if every member of Congress would just say, I'm going to read the Constitution once a year. Once a year. He said that when that resolution introduced, the chairman of the Judiciary looked at him and said, that is the most stupid idea I've ever heard in my life.
You're kidding.
I just asked you to read the Constitution once a year, and the head of the Judiciary Committee
Doesn't
said,
want to get past step 1 here?
he doesn't want to get past step 1. No wonder we don't get step 2, 3, 4, 5 in so many of those committees. And so that's time to have a new committee chair. You just elect different people to Congress. They will elect a committee chair. But you need people in Congress like my friend who said, we need to read this one. So read the Constitution.
And at home.
And at home.
Everywhere I mean, even the people watching now, one thing you can immediately do, you know, we went through a lot of this, but go back and read the entire Constitution cover to cover.
Study it, teach it, and the rising generation or anybody else you can, know constitutional rights so you can perceive when they're violated, then defend those constitutional rights and assert those constitutional rights.
David, this is doable.
This is doable.
This is not some gigantic, impossible plan.
This is doable.
Extremely doable. It's step by step. Every one of us can
And
play
this
a
is
part in
Nehemiah's well. Stop looking at how big the problem is.
Yeah.
You look at focus on rebuilding your part. If you look at focus on rebuilding your part and everybody just does their part, we'll get this thing
and
back
think
up.
of all the good news that we get to hear. You know, on the radio program with our Good News Friday, we always hear about people that have done this and gotten great results. So
Which is why we have that Friday, because we
Yeah.
want everybody else to hear the good news, because you don't hear this on the mainstream media.
Yeah.
They're not going to tell you this.
This will work, no doubt about it. One of the reasons I'm encouraged is just so many people are more interested now than they used to be. We're hearing a lot of these good stories out there. You've been doing this a while. You've got an incredible collection here. You've read the Founding Fathers more than anybody I know. When you step back and look at all of this, how do you maintain your optimism? What really gives you hope that we can accomplish this task, that we can restore our constitutional republic?
What gives me hope is our history. Because when you read history and find, you know, I'm not having to fight the same type of enemy they did. I haven't had to pick up a gun yet to do anything to defend my rights. And I look at what they've gone through, and there's so many occasions where people have been so much worse off than we are. Not that we're not in bad shape constitutionally, we are. I mean, we're at a point where we've got to decide if we're going to defend this thing or just make it a relic of the past, part of the museum display. But in history, God has always raised up good-hearted people that wanted to do the right thing. And I look at Israel. How many times did Israel hit the bottom and forget God and forget their laws and forget the Ten Commandments? And God managed to bring them back every single time. So history is the great encourager for me. I just look at how many times this has happened before, how many times we've been in really tough spots, and how many times God's used citizens to bring us back.
Thank you for opening up your library.
Absolutely, bro.
Thanks for doing this, man. What an encouragement. I know folks out there that are watching this, I know it's encouraged you. We're asking you to join us, to do those 6 things that David just went through, to read it, to study it, make sure you know those rights, that you're willing to teach other people, that you're willing to defend and assert the Constitution. This is your opportunity. Join us in restoring that constitutional republic. We appreciate you being a part of this at Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. Thank you, bro. Great job, man.
Of course, man.
Awesome. That was fun.